Shortly before dawn on the 6th of March 1836, within the walls of a crumbling Spanish mission in the Mexican province of Texas, a ragtag bunch of 200 men found themselves surrounded, outnumbered by nearly 10 to 1. Moments later, a bugle call signaled the start of an attack that promised no mercy. By sunrise, every defender lay dead. But does the story that we know of that fight match what actually took place? In this video, we'll examine historic records, eyewitness accounts, and detail brick-by-brick 3D reconstruction to uncover the real events behind the actions that history remembers as the Battle of the Alamo. To get there, we need to go back to 1835, when tensions between the Mexican government and American settlers in Texas had finally boiled over into open conflict. Over a decade earlier, following independence from Spain, Mexico had invited American settlers to populate and develop the sparsely inhabited region, hoping they would serve as a buffer against Native American raids. Families and frontiersmen arrived in droves, and by 1835, over 30,000 Americans lived in Texas, outnumbering their Mexican neighbors by more than 3 to 1. But when the Mexican government tried imposing centralized policies and abolishing state autonomy, discontent spread, and by 1835, the Texas Revolution had begun. This triggered a mass mobilization of fighters, answering Texan Commander-in-Chief Sam Houston's call for volunteers, adventurers, patriots, and romantics. From New Orleans came the New Orleans Greys, from Kentucky came Captain Duval's Mustangs, and from Alabama the Red Rovers. Most notable was Davy Crockett, a 49-year-old frontiersman, soldier and politician, famed for his earthy storytelling, wilderness skills and coonskin cap. According to legend, he was a man who shot 47 bears in 1 month and rode alligators for exercise. When the Texan Revolution started, Crockett had just lost an election, famously telling his constituents that they could go to hell and that he would go to Texas. Already there was another towering figure, Jim Bowie, or Bowie. Feel free to continue the 200-year-long argument about how to pronounce that one in the comments. Born in Kentucky and raised in Louisiana, Bowie was a land speculator, adventurer, and occasional outlaw. He gained fame in 1827 after the Sandbar fight, where despite being shot twice and stabbed multiple times, he killed an opponent with his large hunting knife, giving the Bowie knife its legendary name. Bowie eventually moved to Texas, married into wealth, but tragedy struck in 1833 when he lost his wife and 2 infant children to cholera. Grief and drink led him to the Texas Revolution, where he served as a volunteer militia colonel. One of the key early successes for the Texians was here in the regional capital of San Antonio de Bejar. In December 1835, after a grueling siege, the Mexican force was defeated, giving the Texians control of San Antonio and a little-known nearby fort. Let's take a look. What is now known as the Alamo was a former Spanish mission complex built in the early 18th century just outside San Antonio. Over the last 300 years, San Antonio has massively expanded and today has swallowed up much of the site. But by overlaying the footprint of the fort onto the modern satellite view, we can see where it once stood, a collection of ragged structures covering an area of 3 acres with a rectangular walled compound bordering a central plaza. But we can go a step further by turning to a digitally reconstructed Alamo, painstakingly created using dozens of period maps, images, sketches, plans and descriptions, giving us a unique opportunity to explore the site as it was in 1836. Starting above the fort, we see this irrigation ditch surrounding the main complex, effectively providing a trench system for the defenders, behind which are the hastily patched 2 to 3 meter high mud brick walls of the fort. To the east are horse and cattle pens, each defended by a single cannon and reinforced walls. Today, the most recognisable part of the remaining complex is the church, with its famous facade. Back in 1836, it was incomplete, with no roof, leaving it exposed to the elements. Instead of a sanctuary, it was made into a fortified gun position, with a wooden ramp leading to a battery of 12-pounders facing eastwards. Outside its main western door, we find the Alamo Fort Plaza. Immediately to the left is a further gun and wooden palisade, outside which and protecting its approaches is a thorny abatis. Within the main courtyard and on the southern walls are several buildings, used at the time for a kitchen, guardroom and officers' quarters. Outside the guardroom and protecting the main southern gate is this earth and timber lunette, housing 2 more guns and a sally port on its western face. In the heart of the central plaza and facing south to protect the main gate, we find a ramp and gun position with their 9-pounders, adding further firepower to the large 18-pound gun on a raised platform in the fort's southwest corner. Running away from here, some 460 feet, is the western wall, which includes the artillery command post, several more field pieces, and the Alamo's headquarters, where some of the most famous words in American history were written by guttering candlelight. On the far side of the plaza, we see a series of buildings making up the inner east wall, including the Long Barracks, jail, and just here the convent, which would become the hospital and refuge for non-combatants. Finally, there's the north wall, and the most vulnerable point of the fort. In 1836, it was in disrepair, with gaps and areas that had been hastily reinforced with timber and earth, along with ramp and several gun positions, installed in attempts to bolster its defences. Ultimately, and despite its size, the Alamo was poorly equipped for a prolonged siege, with limited supplies and inadequate fortifications. Whilst the Texians, Anglo-settlers, and Tejanos, Hispanic Texans, now occupied San Antonio and the Alamo, Mexico's president, General Antonio López de Santa Anna, had started marching north with an army at his back. His mission? Crush the Texian rebels once and for all. Let's pause right here for a moment for a word about this video's sponsor, Ver Watches, who, as it happens, love history just as much as we do, and that passion is reflected in each of their designs. They have a whole range of military and history-inspired watches to choose from, each with its own unique style. But this one has to be one of my favourites, the C4 Tactical. Designed to be super high-spec and inspired by the legendary Benrus Type 1 diver issued to Navy SEALs in the 1970s, it's a perfect blend of style and function. And as a hard-wearing solar, just 6 hours of daylight provides 6 months of power. It has great nighttime lume, matte finish and anti-reflective surfaces. It's comfortable, and its Epson VS42 movement makes it extremely accurate too, and of course fully waterproof up to 200 meters. And let's be fair, it looks amazing. I wear my Ver on a daily basis, and I'm not just saying this, they're a real quality brand and can be worn in pretty much any situation. So if you want to support us and the people who make videos like this possible, be sure to check out the link below. So back to the story. By February 1836, Santa Anna had crossed the Rio Grande at the head of a force of around 6,000 men, hauling 12 cannon, determined to avenge earlier defeats like the loss at Bejar. At first glance, his army looked formidable, but closer inspection revealed poorly trained, underpaid conscripts led by gaudily dressed and often inexperienced officers. And in terrible weather, with bad logistics, the northward advance became grueling and costly. Waiting for them behind the crumbling walls of the Alamo were less than 200 Texian rebels and 18 cannon. Leading them was William Barrett Travis, a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel and former lawyer from South Carolina. On the 3rd of February, he arrived at the Alamo with 18 regulars, joining Jim Bowie and his 30 volunteers who had arrived 2 weeks earlier. When Travis asserted command of the fort, Bowie protested, but a compromise was reached. Bowie commanded the volunteers, Travis the regulars. 5 days later, Davy Crockett arrived with his band of Tennessee volunteers howling and cheering as they rode through the south gate, dressed as outlandishly as he was. The energy of these 3 men transformed what should have been a hopeless situation. Bowie gathered intelligence on the approaching Mexican forces, Travis strengthened the fortifications and drilled the men, while Crockett kept morale high with tales around the campfire. Weeks of speculation and false reports ended just after 1 p.m. on the 23rd of February, when the San Fernando church bell clanged out the warning every ear had been waiting for. The lookout shouted down to the plaza, "The enemy are in view." Defenders rushed their women and children into the garrison. Men herded livestock into the corral on the east side of the fort and took up their pre-arranged positions around the Alamo's perimeter. Inside his quarters, Travis wrote one of the most famous letters in Texian history. "The enemy in large force is in sight. We have 150 men and are determined to defend the Alamo to the last. Give us assistance." At first he addressed this to the nearest Texian leader, a judge in Gonzales. Then, his dramatic instinct taking over, crossed this out and wrote instead to any inhabitants of Texas. By early afternoon, Santa Anna's vanguard approached from the west and began encircling the fort. A red flag snapped above the nearby church, its meaning unmistakable. No quarter, no surrender, no mercy. Travis' reply, one which caused something of a rift with Bowie, who had wanted to seek terms, was equally clear. A single defiant boom from the fort's 18-pounder. No surrender. The siege had begun. Over the next 24 hours, more Mexican troops arrived, swelling the attacking force to 2,100 as they began digging siege works. Santa Anna took quarters in the town and emplaced his guns, readying for the bombardment. Identifying exact locations in modern San Antonio is difficult, but by overlaying this detailed map of the period onto a satellite view, we can see where those guns were initially positioned, ranging from 300 to 1,000 yards from the fort's walls. It wasn't all smooth sailing for the Mexican commander though. He had hoped to invest the fort with a proper siege train and large caliber siege guns, but they were still several weeks away, and so his smaller cannon at closer ranges were often at risk from Crockett's rifle-armed sharpshooters. One major advantage the besiegers did have though was in stores. They had plenty of powder and round shot, meaning they could hammer away at leisure, whilst the defenders had to carefully husband each cannonball. Before long, the first iron round shot hurtled towards the fort, smashing into walls and sending dust and debris raining down. Inside, defenders huddled at their posts. Alamo and Dickinson, commander of the artillery, stood atop the church roof, worrying about his wife and baby daughter below. Crockett and his Tennessee volunteers crouched behind the wooden palisade, and women and children sought shelter amongst the crates and sacks in the dark rooms of the convent as the thump of gunfire echoed overhead. During the relentless bombardment, Bowie, already seriously ill, collapsed and had to relinquish full command to Travis. Alamo law says he was carried to a room on the fort's southern side, drifting in and out of consciousness for days. Amid the chaos, Travis penned his most famous message on February the 24th. To the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character to come to our aid with all dispatch, victory or death. He handed it to Albert Martin, who snuck through the Mexican lines to Gonzales, where he delivered the most famous of messages before returning to the Alamo, slipping back into the fort to fight and die with his comrades. For 13 days, the defenders endured. Mexican artillery pounded the walls day and night as the besiegers' numbers continued to grow. Sleep was scarce, sometimes only minutes at a time, as Santa Anna staged nightly demonstrations to exhaust the defenders. Mexican siege works crept forward, only for Texians to sally out and burn down the buildings, offering them cover for their trench works. Despite their courage, food and ammunition dwindled. Every day, defenders scanned the horizon, hoping for Colonel Fannin's 350 men from Goliad or Sam Houston's army. Neither would arrive. There was a brief reprieve at 3 a.m. on the 1st of March when 32 volunteers from Gonzales broke through the Mexican encirclement and joined the defenders, bringing their number to about 200 against roughly 3,100. Late on the 5th of March, Travis likely gathered the men in the plaza. Sensing that Santa Anna would attack at dawn, he gave anyone wishing to leave the final chance. Legend has it he drew a line in the dust with his sword. Those who crossed would fight, those who stayed could leave. Apparently only one man, reportedly a French Napoleonic War veteran named Louis Rose, did not cross. Whatever the truth of that famous moment, for the remaining defenders of the garrison, it would be a fight to the death. Travis' estimation was right, and before dawn on the 6th of March 1836, the assault began. Shouts of Viva Santa Anna rang out, and according to Texian accounts, the bugle's call, El Tejuelo, the throat-cutting song, played repeatedly, signalling that mercy would be given to none. Mexican infantry advanced from all sides, ladders raised, pikes and crowbars ready, bayonets glinting in the pale light. 4 columns struck the Alamo simultaneously, northwest, northeast, east and south, while Santa Anna held a reserve in the north, ready to commit them where needed. The main assault was here against the north wall by 700 men led by Santa Anna's brother-in-law, General Cos, the very man who had lost the Alamo the previous December. Screaming "Arriba!", Cos had hurled his men forward. The first wave attacking in column faltered under heavy Texian gunfire which blazed out from the wooden catwalk behind the north wall, but more pressed on. Muskets glowed from constant reloading, hands blistered, defenders fought desperately. At the north battery, Travis fired his shotgun into the attackers, shouting, "Hurrah, my boys!" Seconds later, struck by a musket ball, he fell dead. Almost in revenge for their lost commander, the guns of the northern wall fired canister shot into the packed ranks of the Mexican Alamo battalion, perhaps killing dozens of men, and another blast killed or maimed half a company of the Tolucas. The first wave was beaten back, and the second. Then in the chaos of the third assault, battalions veered and mingled and swarmed together at the weak north wall. For 15 minutes the Mexicans were at the mercy of the accurate Texian rifle fire, and their scaling ladders had all been lost or trampled. Then, exploiting the rough carpentry of the hastily patched defences, men started to climb. General Cos also wheeled his men to attack on the western flank of the Alamo, where they could climb and squeeze through embrasures. Suddenly, they were in. Alma and Dickinson ran to the church where his wife sat, clutching their 15-month-old daughter. "Great God, Sue, the Mexicans are inside our walls. If they spare you, save my child." Then he returned to his guns, never to see his family again. The Mexicans now poured into the plaza and the buildings around it. As a wave of attackers poured over the north wall, Colonel Morales' men regrouped at the southwestern corner and climbed the barbette before pouncing on the crew of the 18-pound gun, bayoneting them and taking the southwest corner of the fort before assaulting the main gate from the rear. The defenders, forced into the tenuous shelter of the compound's buildings, fought hand to hand and room to room. Bowie, legend says, lying bedridden in this room, emptied his pistols into the attackers before drawing his knife. But the soldiers overwhelmed his lonely redoubt, shooting and bayoneting the great fighter to death. Near the north wall, the men from Gonzales calmly withdrew, firing in pairs back to the long barrack, the interior of which had been prepared with fallback positions. They were cornered and outnumbered, but they would sell their lives dearly, giving ground inch by inch. Mexican dead and wounded started piling outside in the plaza as bullets spat from loopholes. Then Mexican officers gripped the situation and turned the Texans' own artillery pieces on the defenders, blasting open the doors and walls. This was followed by a musket volley and then a blood-curdling scream as the attackers charged in with bayonets and finished anyone still alive. Having been pushed back from the palisade, what was left of Crockett's party, according to one account, made their own last stand before the church. Smoke filled the air thick as fog, and when it had cleared, so the story goes, the supine form of Davy Crockett was left a mass of coonskin, moccasin and blood, immortalised in history. As the defenders' situation became helpless, several men, perhaps even several groups, leapt the walls and made for the open country. Accounts suggest that the quartermaster was one, but the Dolores cavalry was waiting. Sweeping down on the scene, they killed them to a man. In less than 90 minutes, every defender of the Alamo was dead, killed in the fighting or butchered afterwards. Only 20 non-combatants survived. These were women, children, and Colonel Travis' enslaved man named Joe. It's through their testimony that the actions inside the Alamo are remembered, and they don't always agree. For instance, Susanna Dickinson, wife, now widow, to Almiron, the artillery commander, survived with her daughter and said she saw Crockett's body lying amid a pile of the dead outside the chapel. A Mexican officer, however, insisted that Crockett and some of the other defenders were initially captured alive before being summarily executed on Santa Anna's orders. What truly happened in those final moments we'll likely never know. Once the dust had settled, Santa Anna's troops scoured the mission, gathering and looting the bodies. Nearly 200 men, Travis, Bowie, Crockett, Dickinson, and all the rest, were eventually burned on the great funeral pyres outside the walls. But their sacrifice was not forgotten. Word of the Alamo's fall spread across Texas and into America. Horror turned to fury. Volunteers poured in from every direction, farmers leaving fields, blacksmiths abandoning forges. In April, Sam Houston's army confronted Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. 900 Texians charged a much larger Mexican force and won in just 18 minutes, their battle cry echoing through history. Remember the Alamo. Thanks for watching, and a huge thanks to our sponsor for this video, Ver. Be sure to check out their fantastic collection of watches at the link below. And I'd like to finish with a thank you to our YouTube members and Patreons whose support quite literally makes videos like this possible. To find out more, check out the link below. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.